They thought they could steal my road while I was gone, slap a toll gate on it, and charge my own neighbors to pass through land I legally owned, but they didn't count on the moment I'd come back, read the county deeds twice, smile once, and fire up a bulldozer that would change everything. If you love jaw-dropping war revenge stories where arrogance meets unstoppable justice, hit subscribe now, because this one escalates fast and ends in a way no one saw coming. When I left town for 6 months to care for my dying uncle 3 states away, the last thing on my mind was the narrow 2-lane road that cut through my property like a scar from another era, a private access road I'd inherited along with the land itself, deeded to my grandfather in the 1960s before the suburbs swallowed the farmland and before an HOA ever learned to weaponize clipboards and fines. And I'd always known the Homeowners Association next door resented that road because it was the fastest shortcut between their gated community and the main highway. But resentment and ownership are two very different things, or at least they were supposed to be, because when I finally returned home exhausted, grieving, and eager for normalcy, the first thing I saw wasn't my porch or my mailbox but a gleaming steel toll gate planted squarely across my road like a middle finger made of aluminum, complete with a keypad, a card reader, a solar panel, and a smug sign that read Private Community Access, $5 per pass, and for a moment I honestly thought I was hallucinating from the long drive, until a minivan rolled up behind me and a man leaned out his window and yelled, "Hey, you gotta pay or back up," as if I were the trespasser on my own land, and that's when I noticed the WA logo stamped everywhere like a brand on cattle, and my stomach didn't drop so much as harden, because I'd grown up watching my grandfather fight off developers with nothing but a tractor and a stack of yellow deeds, and I knew exactly how these stories ended if you didn't stop them early, so I pulled forward, parked sideways across the road, and walked up to the gate to read every word, noticing how professionally installed it was, poured concrete footings and all, which meant this wasn't some rogue prank but a deliberate, expensive move, and when I called the number on the sign, a cheerful WA administrator answered and informed me, in the same tone one might use to explain a parking violation, that while I was away the association had assumed maintenance responsibility for the road and implemented a toll system to cover costs, and when I told her I owned the road she laughed softly and said, "Sir, our lawyers wouldn't allow us to build on land we don't control," which was the moment I realized this wasn't ignorance but strategy, because while I was gone they'd filed paperwork, petitioned the county, greased palms, and bet everything that I wouldn't have the money, energy, or knowledge to fight back, and maybe they were right for most people, but I wasn't most people, because my uncle had left me his equipment rental business in his will, and with it came access to machines that made toll gates look like toys, and still I didn't rush, because the first rule of winning against an WA is to document everything, so I took photos, videos, measurements, recorded phone calls, pulled my deed from the safe, drove to the county clerk's office the next morning, and spent 6 hours tracing property lines that hadn't changed in 60 years, discovering along the way that the WA had filed an emergency easement request, claiming the road was abandoned, which would have been laughable if it weren't so bold, because abandonment requires years of non-use and I'd been using that road monthly, receipts and GPS logs to prove it, and when I confronted the WA board at their next meeting they smiled through clenched teeth and told me I could apply for a resident access card at a discounted rate, which is when something inside me snapped quiet instead of loud, because rage gets you arrested but patience gets you justice, so I hired a surveyor, then a land use attorney, and then, because I wanted witnesses, I invited the local news to cover a property rights dispute, and suddenly the WA president wasn't smiling anymore, especially when the surveyor hammered stakes into the ground showing the gate was not just on my road but several feet inside my property boundary, which meant trespass, illegal construction, and damages, but instead of backing down they doubled down, citing some obscure statute and threatening to fine me for interfering with community infrastructure, at which point my attorney advised an injunction, but injunctions take time, and time was money for them because every day that gate stayed up normalized their theft, so I made a different call, one that was perfectly legal and perfectly devastating, because the deed didn't just give me ownership of the road, it gave me exclusive rights to alter it, close it, or remove obstructions, and after verifying with the county sheriff that civil self-help removal was allowed if done safely on private land, I scheduled a delivery, and 2 days later, at dawn, a lowboy trailer rolled onto my property carrying a yellow bulldozer that gleamed like a promise, and by the time the WA realized what was happening half the neighborhood was already gathered, phones out, because nothing draws a crowd like the sound of diesel and destiny, and when the WA president arrived screaming about lawsuits and restraining orders I handed him copies of the deed, the survey, the sheriff's written acknowledgement, and a notice of trespass, then climbed into the cab, because sometimes the most powerful statement is action, not words, and I eased the blade forward, nudging the gate just enough to test resistance, concrete cracking like thin ice, and then I pushed, slowly, deliberately, the way my grandfather taught me, until the entire structure tipped and collapsed sideways into a pile of expensive scrap, and the silence afterward was so complete you could hear someone gasp. But I wasn't done, because the toll booth sat next, then the solar panel, then the sign, all removed and stacked neatly on the wall side of the boundary line like returned mail, and for good measure I graded the road, installed my own temporary barrier, and posted a sign that read private road, no trespassing, and that should have been the end, but HOAs don't go quietly, so they sued me, of course they did, alleging damages, loss of revenue, emotional distress, and a dozen other things their lawyers could bill for, and I countersued for trespass, illegal construction, fraud, and abuse of process, and that's when discovery became a massacre, because emails surfaced showing board members joking about bulldozing him with paperwork, and celebrating the gate as a fait accompli, and worse, records revealed they'd charged residents tolls without proper authorization, pocketing some of the money through a shell maintenance company owned by the HOA president's brother, and suddenly this wasn't just a property dispute but a potential criminal case, so the county stepped in, froze the HOA's accounts, and issued stop work orders across the community, which meant no landscaping, no pool maintenance, no security patrols, and the residents who'd cheered the gate at first now wanted blood, because nothing turns neighbors against an HOA faster than losing amenities, and in the mediation that followed the HOA agreed to a settlement so lopsided it felt fictional. They acknowledged my ownership publicly, paid damages, reimbursed residents for illegal tolls, dissolved the current board, and granted me a permanent recorded covenant prohibiting any future construction on my road without my written consent. But the final twist came months later when the community, desperate to repair its reputation and infrastructure, voted to purchase the road outright at market value, and I said no, not because the offer wasn't generous but because some things aren't for sale, especially when they represent a line that shouldn't be crossed, so instead I did something unexpected. I offered a limited access agreement with clear terms, no tolls, shared maintenance costs, and an automatic termination clause if they ever tried to pull something like that again, and they accepted, chastened and quieter than before, and today when I drive that road I still see faint marks where the gate once stood, a reminder that ownership isn't just about paperwork but about the willingness to defend what's yours, because the truth is they didn't lose when the bulldozer showed up, they lost the moment they assumed I wouldn't come back ready to fight, and every time someone asks if I regret going that far I think about how close I came to losing something my family held for generations, and I smile. Because sometimes the only reasonable response to unreasonable power is a machine that weighs 30,000 pounds and a spine strong enough to use it.